Good afternoon and welcome to the Joy Show, the place where being you is celebrated because there is just one you. Well, let us begin with our land acknowledgement. We work, live, and play on the historical and traditional territory of many First Nations. And as we gather from many places on Turtle Island, we as settlers are grateful for the opportunity to meet here. And we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years, including the Métis, Inuit, and all other Indigenous peoples. Also acknowledging that as we continue to grow and expand on these lands, there is still unresolved and dangerous inequality and discrimination between our BIPOC and 2S LGBTQ plus family. And by making these acknowledgements, we strive to be allies and take an active part in this reconciliation. We recognize our oneness, we realize our history, and we choose to create a new reality, for we are one. Well, my guest today is the Reverend Dr. Patrick Harbula. He's a spiritual teacher, life coach, ordained in 1985, and boy, he's touched the life of thousands of people. His book, Magic of the Soul, is really one of the most remarkable books ever. You need to go out and get it right away and take the exercises, do the work, and watch what happens because the results are miraculous. Welcome, Patrick. I'm so glad you're here. So, spiritual teacher, master of the universe. Tell me a little bit about how you got started in this realm.
How I got started in this realm? Well, I've always, as a child, I was always kind of a very philosophical person. Got involved in philosophy when I was in high school. Was taking college philosophy courses actually, and then around 19 years old, so I started meditating at 18. Actually, I was fortunate enough to have found a course called Mind Probe One. And so I started on a meditation path. And most people will find books, find teachings, and then get into meditation, and then have spiritual experiences. For me, it was kind of backwards. Is I found meditation first, and then had some mystical experience. Had a what many would call a moment of cosmic consciousness when I was 19 years old, and just changed me forever. And so it wasn't for a few years later till I started finding, books and communities and finding that, oh, there's other people who actually understand this stuff too. There's a lot of stories about people who find science of mind and new thought, that is their story, right? And so, yeah, I found new thought when I was 23, fell in love with that, and started studying right away and became a minister at 27, and been going ever since.
Wow, that's remarkable. I think at 27 I had a spiritual epiphany which then led me to all of the things that you're talking about, meditation being kind of the last place I went, because it was like I just didn't have time for that. That's what
Yeah.
being my teacher. I don't have time to meditate. I'm too busy. And then I figured out once I started meditating, my days seemed to have more room in them. I got more done in less time.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So when you found new thought, tell me about that experience for you. Like, were you raised with traditional religion and then switched, or how did
Well,
that?
that's interesting. Great question. So when I was I was raised in Catholic school, and when I was in fifth grade, um, I I proclaimed myself an atheist.
Yeah.
um, I just, when I reached the age of reason, I just thought, well, I don't think I believe in this Adam and Eve stuff, and all these other stories just don't seem realistic to me. And
Yeah.
so I decided, it must all be fantasy. And then in high school, I just started getting the sense that there must be something more than this, something up there, but it's not the God that I learned about in Catholic school, right? It's got to be more than what we as human beings can even fathom, right? So
Yeah.
at that point, I just became somewhat agnostic. There's something out there, but I don't know what it is. And then when I had that experience of cosmic consciousness, and just in that moment, is that a talking? What do you call that?
I don't know. That's a weird
A rain
sound in
stick?
the background.
Sounds like a rain stick. Um,
It did.
so when I had that moment of cosmic consciousness, realizing, feeling, experiencing that everything is one, everything is happening at the same time. Um, that's when I realized, okay, this is what it's all about. And then when I found New Thought, it was like, oh, well, here's communities and writings and teachings and about what I'd already experienced. So
Well, that's interesting because that's kind of what my experience was. I was not raised with religion. None of it really made sense to me, but luckily it wasn't forced on me. My father was agnostic, my mother was a Christian, and he won. So we just didn't do church stuff. And as a teenager, I believed that there had to be something, but that was the extent of it. I was a pretty, terrible kid doing all kinds of bad stuff.
me
At
too.
20,
We would have had fun together.
we could have gotten lots of trouble.
That's right.
But at 27, the magic age of 27, I had that spiritual epiphany, that moment of sort of the, I guess for me, it was like a light switch. Somebody turned the lights on, and all of a sudden I could see. And what I experienced was God as love. And that changed everything. And I was in a traditional church when that occurred. I was trying to please my mother-in-law, so I went to church with her one night and walked out a changed person. The interesting thing was I stayed there for a while, but I had to leave because what they were teaching is what you were talking about. You kind of walked away from as a youth going, I don't really believe these stories. And when I would ask pastor, okay, so you're telling me the rabbi's going to go to hell and the person who's never heard of Jesus is going to hell. And he goes, yes. And I went, okay, I can't buy it. I can't buy it.
Right.
And it was shortly thereafter that I found New Thought,
Yeah.
which
And the
really was.
most ridiculous story of them all, that everyone is born into original sin.
Oh, yes.
Just intuitively, can you look at a newborn baby and think this child must be born in sin, right? But I realized later that that it's all mythology, right? And so there's meaning behind the stories, and in traditional churches, after every reading, they say this is the word of God, and it occurred to me that yes, it is. It's just that it's a fiction book that God was writing.
And God wrote it through people like you and I.
And every book is the word of God because there is only God, right?
Like, ta-da, there we go. We solved all the mysteries of the universe.
There you go.
Well, I know when I first found your book, Magic of the Soul, that it really spoke to me because that energy within us is so powerful. It does seem like magic. It seems like something, like, could this really be true? And it's powerful. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to write the book? And
Well, yeah, I'd been a writer for a long time. I published a meditation magazine back in the day, um, 1985 to 92. And so an interesting story about that is when we stopped publishing the magazine, one of the things in the magazine world at the time is you would pretty much give the magazine away in order to, I mean, if you could break even on subscriptions, then you'd boost the circulation, and then, the advertising would pay, for the salaries of the staff and so on. But so, it occurred to me, and so after that, I would kind of ask people, where do you keep your favorite magazines of all time? I'll ask you that. Where do you keep your favorite magazines of all time?
I actually don't read magazines. I do have Science of Mind, and it's right here beside me.
Okay, but what about all the back copies? Do you keep them, and that's the thing. Most people will say, and Science of Mind is a pretty cherished magazine,
It is.
but most people will say, "Oh, they're either in my box in the basement, or I threw them out a long time ago." But where do you keep your favorite books? I'll show you my little bookcase back here. prominently displayed, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So that's because people revere books,
yeah.
and magazines are rags. They're something you throw away. So I decided if I'm going to write, I'm going to write something that people really value. So really, my first book, The Magic of the Soul, actually is my second book. I wrote a novel that hasn't been published yet, but will someday, called The Dark Night of the Soul.
Oh, okay. I can't wait to read that.
But the magic, I'll send you the manuscript.
Oh, I would love that.
So, but The Magic of the Soul, I just wanted to write a book that of all the things that had helped me on my journey.
Yeah.
And I was teaching the class at was that trying to think of what center it was. Can't remember now. Just the other night, they're doing the 6-week class that's based on my book, and so yeah, it was just it's just so much fun sharing what meant so much to me, right, on this
Yeah.
journey with other people.
Well, that's what I love about it. I also love that what you've got in here are a number of meditations.
Mhm.
And I've got a CD. I don't have anything to play a CD anymore, but, but I do have it. And I loved the practice, like, this one is stilling the mind and taking breaths. And just as you take through the process, a wave of calmness flows through your emotional nature. All of your feelings become more and more calm until you reach a point of complete emotional tranquility. It's yummy.
Mm. And all of the version you had, because you said it was one of the first printings, right?
Yeah.
It has the CD, and it still has the CD in the last printing, but it also has the URL where all of the meditations are on my site as well. So whether you have the book or not, you can go to the site, click on publications, then meditations, and you can get all the meditations that are on the CD in the book, and even some that aren't in the book or on the CD. It just came back to me what I was going to say about the class is what the teacher and the students were saying is there's so much in this book. It's impossible to fit it all into a 6-week course. In fact, when I first published it, before it was curriculum for Religious Science International and then CSL, is I taught it in a 9-month course.
Oh, I like that idea. Oh, that's so great. I found that with some of the classes that we're teaching is that they're put into like self-mastery, the emergence of the true self, was another one. I think it was a 6-week class or an 8-week class. I took it to 10 just to try
Yeah.
and basically get it in. But how do you master the self in 10 weeks?
Right.
It
Yeah.
takes a lifetime.
Yeah. But the thing is, people are just have shorter attentions these days, right? Because there's so much information out there. There's so many things to do. People seem to be so busy these days. So the reality is that the shorter the time period, the easier it is to get people to sign up for a class.
Yeah, that's true. I think, yeah, I wonder if there's a way of creating like I don't know, morning meditations based on your book or something that would, slowly get people, where you do one of the meditations for a week or something and then
Yeah.
switch to another one and just create that flow that people could keep coming back to and engaging them in that way, because meditation really is a very transformative way of moving in life for sure.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'm going to put that into practice. I'm going to create a little program on that.
Well, sign me up when you do, because I love the idea. And revb in the chat says, I love your book, Reverend Patrick, and still remember tapping my knee when things come up for me. It was very helpful.
Ah, nice, nice.
Yeah. So Mary Ellen, or revb, is my associate minister
Mhm.
at my center. So she's she's awesome woman. So the journey that you've been on then, as you've slowly evolved, what changes have been most remarkable to you on your life path as you've come to, journey through meditation, etc.? What has been the most pronounced change?
Wow. Well, I guess what instantly pops into my head is my training in spiritual psychology, which I'll tell you a little bit about that. At the time, Science of Mind and New Thought was very different teaching than it is now. When I took Science of Mind 101, there wasn't really any talk about even emotions, let alone the shadow, right? And so when I completed ministerial school, I found that I had a lot of emotional repressed feelings that I did not know how to deal with. And New Thought at the time didn't have any tools to help me. So that's when I went into spiritual psychology, went through a 4-year program on that, through psychosynthesis specifically, and where I learned the voice dialogue practice that I shared with you. And so that was the biggest life changer for me. And I think that is the biggest reason why the Magic of the Soul has become so popular in New Thought is because it brings together both New Thought principles and practices from transpersonal psychology as well. So it gives New Thought those tools to go deep into the emotional work, into the shadow work, into the deep healing work.
It's so important to do that. And I'm not sure, like I was raised in Religious Science International as well. And and found a bit of a disconnect there. And I found a recording by Carolyn Mace that actually helped me with that dark night of the soul, because I was really struggling and not able to figure out how to sort of marry the two things, the intellect and the emotion. But that's the only way to really live the greatest potential that our life has. We have to acknowledge the shadow side. We have to accept our emotions as it's all good, it's all God. So it's all
Absolutely.
honoring it all is so important.
And that's the good thing about New Thought is, as Ernest Holmes says, it's open at the top, right? And so it's continually evolving. I guess all philosophies are to some degree, but because that's part of the premise of it, I think the reason it's shifted from being all about the mind to now some people say it's a science of the heart as well, is because ministers doing their own personal work realize, hey, I can only go so far focusing on the mind and the positive without, as Carl Jung said, going down that deep well, which is the shadow.
Yeah, and I think the science of the heart, I think, speaks even more loudly to what we actually do.
Yes.
And the work that's needed. I remember when I had that awakening, that spiritual epiphany, it was very much a heart transformation. There was nothing logical about it, but it led to many, many transformations as I moved forward. And I think that as we come to accept, all of us, when we were doing vulnerability as part of our work these last couple of months, and being vulnerable is really one of the richest places to go when we have courage to do it.
Right.
It's not comfortable by any stretch of the imagination, because there's that fear people won't like me, or they're going to judge me, or we have to so get past that.
Yeah, and it's so freeing when we do, right?
It's beautiful.
Right.
It is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful work. And I think that for me, like when we were in the workshop at the convention, going into that vulnerable state, I think I put my hand up second, but you called on me first, and I was like mortified.
I remember that.
I was like, hey, wait a minute. The other person was first, not me. You know what you resist?
Right on.
Exactly. Fiona just wrote in the chat, realizing that the earth has a soul was enlightening and humbling.
Love that.
Yes.
Mm.
That is so good. I hadn't really thought about that, but so
Everything has the soul.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just going to tell you a story that popped into my head about that vulnerability. is after The Magic of the Soul was published, and I started doing a lot of media and public speaking, I started to become depressed. And I'm not one who gets depressed very often. And I couldn't figure out why. So I sat down and did a voice dialogue process with myself. And
Wow.
instantly I got an image of my inner child, me at about 6 years old. And so I said, "So what's up? Why are you feeling so sad?" And my inner child said, "I don't feel like you love me." And I said, "Well, that sounds crazy. I tell you that I love you all the time." And my child said, "You tell me that you love me, but it seems like your actions say otherwise. Because when you're going out and you're now speaking and doing media, it seems like you're kind of hiding me, your vulnerable side, your fears, your sensitivity." And so I just got it. And right. So from that moment onward, I said, I am going to celebrate my inner child. I'm going to celebrate my vulnerability. And so there were times when I'd even say, you know what, because I'm an introvert by nature. So I would even say something like, "I'm frightened just to be up here speaking in front of you people," right? and and guess what? I started connecting with people at so much
Of
deeper a
course.
level, because
Yeah.
rather than being the authority that knows everything, now I'm a human being. So one day I was going to be on a radio show that I wanted to be on for a long time, The Aware Show. It's a big show in California, and they have a network. They have like 100,000 people listening every hour, right? So,
Wow.
so I was going to be on that show, and I woke up in the morning, and I was feeling down, and I thought, "Oh no, I got to be up. I got to finally going to be on the show, right?" And so I said, "No, no, no, that's right. I celebrate where I am." So I said, "I'm going to go as I am." And I went and I talked about on the show, waking up and feeling down and saying, I'm going to bring that energy to this show. And I tell you, I connected more than any other show I'd ever done. And I got like close to 100 people responding, sending me emails from that show. And half of those people showed up my next workshop.
Wow. That's,
How
you know,
ability.
that's the key, right? Be real. There's just one you, so be that.
Right on.
Diego says that shirt has introvert written all over it.
Really? Oh yeah. No, I picked this out because I thought this is the joy show. It feels very, very joyful.
It does. That's very funny. Diego's producing the show today for anybody who doesn't know who Diego is. That's hilarious.
And I love
But that
sarcasm.
idea of being an introvert is really because I too am, I'm sort of on the cusp between introvert and extrovert, but depending on the situation, when I'm speaking to a crowd, I'm the extrovert. But when I go to a party where I don't know hardly anybody, I am absolutely an introvert.
Yeah.
And it's sort of that very funny place of how do I just acknowledge all that I am, which is a little
Mm,
bit of this and that, right?
yeah.
We're not just one thing. We've got all
Right.
sorts of sort of opposing ideas that bounce around that we're trying to live with.
Yeah. And I said I'm a nature. An introvert by nature. I don't even know if that's true anymore, right? Because that certainly as a child, sometimes in workshops, I'll say that, and people will say, "Well, you don't seem like an introvert," and I'll challenge them, say, afterwards, let's share our childhood introversion stories, and I will almost always win. Like when I um, went to kindergarten, and for the first month or so, hid in the closet, the cloakroom as we called it, every recess and lunch because I was so frightened to just even be to interact with other children. Um, but I don't even know if it's true anymore. If I go to a party and my wife's not with me, I probably will feel that awkwardness, right? But I don't even go to parties anymore. So, um,
Either.
so I don't feel like an introvert anymore because virtually my life is doing ceremonies and speaking and workshops and classes pretty much all the time.
Yeah, so you're always out there doing things. Speaking of school, I remember my elementary school grades 1 to 6. I would sit in the back and I would not speak a word. And in grade 1, I was so embarrassed because I had to go to the bathroom really bad, but I was too afraid to put my hand up, and I ended up wetting my pants, which
Yeah.
was a bigger humiliation than if I'd just done this. But it's funny, as little children, how we hide, and then how we sometimes carry that into our adult lives. And I think that's what we need to heal, is that division. Like, somehow there's a part of me that's not acceptable for human consumption. And I wonder if that does not come out of all of the no's and don't do that come in those first 6 years.
Sure, absolutely.
Where we're kind of shut down over and over again for being kids.
Yeah, most of us.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally, I do find these people who had idyllic childhoods. I used to do a workshop. I do it sometimes still, but after The Magic of the Soul was published, I did it a lot, called Live Your Passion, and it was all about life purpose. And interesting question in my life purpose definition or clarification process is, what did you not get enough of as a child? And when people then, and I love to put that question out in front of a big audience and watch the wheels spinning for people. And then the follow-up question is, how does it feel when you create that experience, the fulfillment of the lack that you had, with other people? And that's when the light goes on for most people, and realize, oh, that's what I love the most. That's what my passion is, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know for me, it's love. I didn't get the love that I required. Right. And so the journey has been interesting, because I run into strangers and we have interactions, and we'll start telling each other how much we love each other, even though we have no idea who we are. It's like, it's very real, very authentic expression that happens in a moment when two people connect beyond what feels reasonable or acceptable by your average human standard. Right. Especially between men and women, because I will do it with men or with women. Doesn't matter to me. If it's funny things. I was in a drugstore one day and I'm looking for baking soda, and it happened to be on the very bottom shelf, but there was a gentleman standing there scanning, and I said, "Oh, excuse me, I just need to get something from the bottom." And he goes, "Oh, that's what I was looking for too." And "Oh, we were destined to meet." And I went, "Yeah, I think so." And all of a sudden, "I love you too, man."
How cool.
It was a very fun experience, but unusual by probably most standards. But I think that energy of being open and trusting that the heart knows. Like, I always believe there's a part of me that knows when I'm safe. And because I know I'm safe, I'm always safe. So I don't worry about when I have that impulse to tell a stranger I love them, or how beautiful they look today, or just how wonderful their yard or their garden, whatever. I just go with it because it feels right. We're going to take a little commercial break, because we're getting to that time in our show. We're going to take a short commercial break. We'll be right back. You're watching The Joy Show. There's just one you, so be great, be you. We'll be right back.
Happy birthday, Camp Cedar Ridge. We invite you to come camp and celebrate our first year while in sacred service. May 19th through the 21st, we'll be restoring our beloved meditation labyrinth. Come camp with us for the weekend, and all we'll ask you to cover are the meals. Vegetarian, vegan, and gluten-free options are available. That's the weekend of Friday, May 19th to Sunday, May 21st. You can bring your own tent or act fast and register for one of our glamping tents or bunkhouse beds while supplies last. We do have limited indoor accommodations for an additional fee. Find more details and registration at campcedarridgeor.org/lab.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors and donors, including the Hefferland Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown Atlanta, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Spiritual Center Kitchener, Om Center for Spiritual Living, Center for Spiritual Living North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, Center for Spiritual Living Seattle, and all of our individual donors and sponsors. Thank you for being a part of the New Thought Media Network. Please come be you.
And we're back. My guest today is the Reverend Dr. Patrick Harbula. He is the author of Magic of the Soul and my great guest today. So back to this journey of yours, because it has, it's kind of moved and done some different things. So tell me a little bit about how you came to even find New Thought. Like what was the connection there?
Yeah, I will do that. I just want to back up a minute, though, and say one more thing about the purpose statement, that if what we didn't get enough of as a child is what inspires us to create it in the world, then guess what? Maybe it's not a liability. Maybe it's, in fact, our greatest strength. Now, it's a double-edged sword, because usually the thing that we most want to create is the hardest thing to create for ourselves. But that's okay, right? Because in fact, Oriah Mountain Dreamer said, the things that we struggle with the most in life are the things that we demonstrate and teach the best, because we know the steps of how to get there. And so most self-help says, here's another process to get over what you didn't get enough of. What this says is maybe there's nothing to get over other than the belief there's something to get over. And
I love that.
Hi, Naomi. Oh, one of my favorite people is Naomi is on. What does she say? Yes. Through this exercise with Patrick, I created my life purpose statement. I praise and inspire glowing hearts. I spread gentle, loving kindness.
So beautiful. So beautiful, Naomi.
I love to quote Robert Bly, who said, our wound is our gift to the world.
I really believe that. I really believe that. And I think if we can find a way to, bridge that, where we stop judging it as bad and wrong and instead integrate it into who we are, it's that moment where we become unstoppable. That's when the genius is released.
Yeah. For
sure. For sure. Thank you for bringing us back there, because that's absolutely so important for everyone to acknowledge that piece of us that we are resistant to is the very thing that frees us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you said earlier that, healing the stuff from the past, and it all comes down to me, to self-love as the most important practice. So many clients, gosh, I had a client recently who sometimes I'll ask this question, if I sense that raising self-esteem is part of, what we can do together. And the question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you love yourself? And it's amazing how honest of answers I tend to get back from that. I've had people say 2. I've had 1. I had recently someone who actually happens to be a practitioner say 0. And that is why sometimes I'll get a bit on a pulpit, just saying that, I think even in our teaching, we don't emphasize self-love enough, because how can you become a practitioner, right, and not have a high sense of self-love? That ought to be, in my estimation, Science of Mind 101 ought to be all about self-love, because most of our teaching is about how to manifest what you want, but obviously you can't manifest any more you feel you deserve. So whatever your number is, your manifesting a life is going to be equal to that number. It's below, if it's 10, less than 10, there's room for growth. If it's 5 or less, the most important thing you can do is to raise that number. So the affirmation I give to people is I love myself no matter what, because the true test of self-love is not loving myself when I just had a great interview on the Joy Show, right? It's when I bomb on a television show or speaking. And I can only think of one time when I bombed, and it's very, very clear in my mind. And I thought, wow, it's an opportunity to love myself more, because if the true test of loving myself is loving myself when I bomb, or when I make a mistake, or when I say something that hurts the feelings of someone I love, then the only time I can exponentially raise self-love is when things are not going well.
Yeah. I've worked with people. I'll say to them, I want you to, when you wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and go, I love you. I really love you. And I've had people who cannot do it.
Yes.
Where we stood together looking in the mirror and tears have rolled down their face, and they have not been able to say the words no matter how long we stand there.
Yeah.
And that, the saddest one for me was a young girl of 13 who could not get there. And I think it really is the most important thing. I know for me, it was a long journey to get to a place where I could accept myself. And I remember years ago speaking as a guest at a church, and I was talking about, it was on Mother's Day, and I was talking about being a mother and blah, 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 doing whatever. And there was this niggling in the back, say how many times you've been married, say how many times you've been married, say how many times you've been married. And I'm like, I can't do that. They'll never have me back.
How many times have you been married? Oh man, I thought I could beat you. This is my fourth.
5, lucky number 5. My husband calls himself lucky number 5. We've been together 21 years. This one's sticking. But it was so funny because I stood up and said, well, I've been married 5 times, and I figured I would give Liz Taylor a run for her money. But there was this kind of a hush through the room where people were like, what did she just say? And then when I came back with the Liz Taylor joke, the place erupted.
Nice.
But it was a vulnerable moment, but it was a very rich session. And at the end, I had about 15 women come up to me and say it was the most honest talk they've ever heard a minister give. And I thought, well, what more could I ask for? Because I walked off the podium going, oh, they'll never have me back. The sinner girl.
Yeah, and what that reminds me of is, when we do, I do retreat. I've been doing my Primal Fire retreats for 30 years now in different areas. Did them in Canada, actually 5 years in Saskatchewan, 5 years in Alberta. But we've been doing the last 6 years on Catalina Island, and I did them years ago there too. And basically, what I love about this retreat is everyone is encouraged to be who they are in the moment. And so talk about vulnerability. We do a lot of, we do all kinds of powerful exercises. We do it, a ceremonial sweat lodge, but and so everyone has peak experiences at different times, but where the real integration and transformation happens is just passing the talking stick and people sharing from their hearts. Because when one person goes deep and breaks down and cries or just talks about something that's unfolding for them, it gives somebody else permission to do that. And so it's this group gestalt that just everyone supports everyone going deeper. And when people are given the freedom to be who they are in the moment, like we say, if you don't want to do an exercise, don't do it. If you feel sad, cry. If you feel happy, laugh out loud. If you're angry, scream at the ocean, scream at a rock. Don't scream at people. But and when people are given that freedom, whatever wants to be healed just comes up so easily. It's just a magical thing.
Well, there's something about that vulnerability that, it seems like when there is like a chain reaction. I mean, it really illustrates our oneness when one person has that experience and then it sort of ripples through like a domino
Right.
and people hit those marks at different points, but everybody seems to get there, which is
Mhm.
wonderful. I do a goddess workshop retreat actually, and on the first night I I have them go deep almost instantly. It's like
Mhm.
we're in a session, usually 10 or 12 women is the extent of it, but we'll have, maybe a few minutes just getting to know each other a little bit. And within the first hour, I will ask them to break into dyads and share their biggest, darkest secret that they've never shared with anybody.
Mm. Yeah.
And I'm always astounded at what they share.
Yeah.
Because then they come back and tell the whole group, and
Wow.
like, it's next level, and I think
Yeah.
that fast in community, they're feeling safe enough to reveal something like that, and it has such a powerful impact that is lasting through the rest of the thing, where all of a sudden the walls are down and people are really connecting in a much deeper way. The willingness to be vulnerable is off the charts, and
Yeah.
that's what's so great about these workshops,
Yeah.
these
Can,
retreats.
yeah, yeah, you shared one with me. I want to share one with you. I'm getting teary just thinking about it. So before the last retreat, my wife Karina had shared with me an article she read in Science of Mind magazine about a woman who her whole teaching was about compassion, and she said if kids were allowed to be wheeled around in a wheelchair for a week when they're young, then every time they see someone in a wheelchair for the rest of their lives, they'll have compassion, right? So I instantly thought of someone who had been to our retreats. He was our firekeeper for our sweat lodge years ago. He'd been in an accident, and they did to relieve some pain. They did a simple procedure, cut the wrong thing, and he woke up paralyzed. So
Mm.
he was recovering. They told him he'd never walk again. But the next year, he came to the retreat, and we literally had to carry him up the mountain to get him to the private beach that we have. But I thought of him, and I thought this is the exercise that evolved out of that. And I'll just give you how it played out when we were there. So we had 26 people, and I asked him to share his journey verbally, and then to act it out non-verbally, what he went through, crawling along the floor to get to the bathroom, right? Peeing himself and just all this stuff, right? And then I asked the entire group to mimic that, their own version of his story. And he got to observe everyone being in his shoes. And he just sobbed because people got to feel, because he got to see people really feeling, not just hearing the story, but feeling
Feeling it.
what he felt. And then we broke into groups of four, and each person, and usually I'll go around and help facilitate, but the numbers just worked out right for me to be in a group. So I was in a group with three women, all of whom I'd coached, all of whom had been sexually abused as children, and all. So for them to share that, and to demonstrate it, and for then the group to demonstrate what they demonstrated, and for me to demonstrate my childhood trauma, um, was just nothing ever like it. I mean, I'm just crying thinking about it. And so, I'd coached all these women, but I understood their pain at so much deeper level than I could have just by getting it verbally.
It's interesting that idea of walking in somebody else's shoes is such a
Mhm.
powerful one, because I think if we each stopped for a moment and considered the person in front of us, we would we would be different. I remember meeting a woman in Calgary a couple of years ago when I was visiting, and she was walking along an outdoor mall, and she had her shopping cart with all her worldly possessions on it, and she was asking people for change. And so I stopped to chat with her for a while and gave her some money, and we talked, and she was like, "Wow, you're being kind to me," like it was unheard of.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, of course." And she goes, "No, people have been spitting at me. People, will
Mhm.
push me away. They'll tell me, you know, expletives that I won't repeat here." But she said, "But you're being kind." I said, "But by the grace of God, I could be you."
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And, I've lived in poverty. I know what that feels like. I've, lived all sorts of weird things in my life experience. And so, I mean, I've never been fully homeless, but I do have a compassion for other people, knowing that life can turn on a dime. We don't
Exactly.
know what tomorrow brings, but opening our hearts to people around us. One of the most painful things I see is because here in Toronto, we have a lot of homeless people.
Mhm.
And I watch people, walking down the street and looking in the opposite direction so they don't have to make eye contact. And my thought is, if I don't have money, I just go, hey, sorry, man, I don't have any money. How are you today? What's happening? Have a conversation, or at least say, hey, how's
Yeah.
your day going so far? Whatever. And if you have change, fine. If you don't, you don't. But to pretend they don't exist,
Mhm. Yeah.
that's that to me, it hurts me to see it. I
Mhm.
can't imagine what it feels like for the person who's experiencing it on that side, like to
Right.
be disregarded so completely. And we see that in lots of areas, whether it's people in wheelchairs. I was at the Unity Convention last year and I was using a walker because I couldn't stand.
Mhm.
And as I was moving around, you could see how people were annoyed that I
Mhm.
was moving too slowly or that I was trying to get through the crowd, which meant they had to move out of my way. Like, and I'm at a Unity convention. I'm thinking,
Wow.
wow,
Huh.
people. Now I had healing there as well, which was awesome. I don't need a walker any longer. But it
Mhm.
was interesting. So I have a whole new level of compassion for people who are using walkers and trying to get across the street while I'm driving, trying to get where I'm going, right? I
Right.
don't care if they take all day.
Mhm.
I'm good with that because I know what it's like to be in pain and trying to move through crowds of people or whatever as good as you can. And like you say, you get people to do it, and all of a sudden it changes the game. You have
Mhm.
a new understanding.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
I just
awesome.
just learned a new song recently. I learned to play guitar a few years ago. Walk a
Yeah.
mile in my shoes.
Oh, yes, yes. That would change everything,
Right.
if everyone had a moment where they had to be somebody else for the day,
Mm.
or even when it comes to your spouse, right? Because
Yep.
our spouse does things different than we do. Like, my husband's very thoughtful and methodical, and he reads directions and things. It's very
Mhm.
weird. Um, me, I just
He's a man and he reads directions?
I know, it's so weird. Um, but it's funny because every now and again I'll just sit back and I'll watch him with a whole new appreciation,
Mm.
going, "You do things very differently than me." And it's all good,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think I got divorced in the past because they didn't fit my mold. Whereas with Pierre, it's like it's fun just to watch his process
Mm.
and to learn from it and
Mhm.
and to love him enough to just go, wow, that's how you do that. Cool. And just be okay with it.
Yeah. I've found that and my first teacher said this, and I found it to be true, is that opposites attract on a personality level, and likeness attracts on a soul level. And so the best combination is someone who's different, and we are attracted to people who are different because we want to learn from that
Yeah.
way of being, right? Um,
Mhm.
and so the best combination is someone who's different at a personality level but has similar values, because that's the soul
Yes.
level. But the caveat is that the things that we're attracted to about someone are the very things that drive us nuts when they're magnified or being expressed in a intense way.
Yes, yes, exactly. Well, I've often thought that who we marry is a combination of our parents, the good and the bad of it,
Hmm. Hmm.
all of it, not
Yeah.
just. not just the good stuff, but all of it, that somehow it's all married together in this one individual that will push our buttons, but also delight and excite us as well. So there's this very odd mix that occurs. But if we can sit in it, I think there's great healing that happens. I think that's why we attract who we attract, is the healing that will come from it.
And sometimes if it is too intense, or we're not ready, we're not able to sit into it long enough, the integration comes after the relationships ends.
Oh yeah.
And that's perfectly fine too. I've never thought that marriage necessarily should be for life, right? I mean, and if you look at the numbers, people who think that, oh, I'm going to get married at 20 years old and be monogamous with that person until I die, you've got whatever it is, over 50% divorce rate. Then you've got, the numbers I heard about infidelity are like 60, I think it was 63% for women and 72% for men, right?
Yeah.
So if you add all those together, the success rate of monogamy from early age to death is probably 90,
minuscule.
5% of people that make that grade, right?
And are they happy in the process? There would be the other thing to add to the mix.
Right.
Are they just putting in time? Right. I've met a lot of people just putting in time. Mm-hmm. And it's like, for what? What are you waiting for?
Yeah.
It's like, we're here to live, whatever that looks like. And it's how we perceive our own path is up to us. No one else can define it for us. And being able to honor how we really feel moment by moment, to tell our truth, because of course we know that truth is kind of a flexible thing depending on perception. But it's interesting to watch how people journey along and find their way or not. And I'm meeting more and more people who are a little more open when it comes to their marriages, where they're creating marriages that are more inclusive of other people, because they realize that what they have actually requires more.
Now, are you talking about polyamory, or are you talking about social?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's just, a different perspective. I don't think I could handle that, but I know people who live that way very happily, and seems to work for them. And I suppose it works for as long as it works, like anything else, right?
Yeah.
There might come a point of change for that. Now we're getting down to our last 6 minutes here.
Okay.
And so what I'd like is for you to share with the audience one thing that you think is most important as we are on this soul journey. How can we most fully live our best self, do you think?
Mm-hmm. It definitely has to come back to what I said earlier. The most important thing is self-love. And, sometimes it can be just as subtle and as simple as just giving yourself a break. What's the inner dialogue that you hear in your head, right? Is it critical or is it loving? And that's a great litmus test for, am I loving myself? When I make a mistake, do I hear, you idiot? Or do I hear, it's okay? Well, we're learning from this, right? The magic of the soul is all about looking for the magic in every experience, looking for, or another way of saying that is what, in our teaching, we used to say, and still sometimes say, it used to be taught this way though, what was the wrong thinking that created that situation?
Yes.
I find the better question to ask is, what is the greater love, freedom, joy, any spiritual quality that wants to emerge from this situation, right? So now I am accessing this as something to empower myself rather than resisting, because the thing that I say probably 20 times a week is, whatever we resist not only persists, but magnifies, becomes stronger.
Yes.
Whatever we embrace becomes our ally, our teacher, and our healer. And most importantly, the things we resist in ourselves. The process, we were going to talk about voice dialogue. We didn't get to that, but I'll just say that the simple way to do that process of voice dialogue or subpersonality work is anything that you think about yourself that you don't like. Imagine it is a small child, and how would you want to respond to a small child? I hear people say all the time, we need to embrace all of ourself, our shadow. And then they'll say in the next sentence, but I have this fear and I got to get over it. Well, if you said to a small child, a fearful child, I have to get over you, how would it respond? It's going to become more frightened. If you say to a child who's angry, if you're angry, it's not okay to be angry, right? Then that child's going to become more angry, right? So whatever we resist persists. So how would you want to respond to a small child? With love always. Sometimes, being direct and giving guidance, but always with love, because otherwise it won't be received.
Oh, that's beautiful. That is so beautiful. That idea of speaking to a small child is such a good one.
Mm-hmm.
When my youngest daughter, I have 4 children, but my youngest daughter, when she was in, I don't know, grade 3 or 4, she was crying at school one day. And the teacher's aide said to her, stop doing that because you're upsetting the other children.
Mm-hmm.
And so I very quickly went to the school and talked to the principal and said, no, that can't ever happen again. If my child is crying, then let her cry.
Wow.
Feelings are feelings are feelings. They're allowed. There's nothing bad or wrong about it. If another child gets upset as well, then that child needs to be nurtured and loved. So that message of love is absolutely the most important, that as we acknowledge each other in our frailty and in our brilliance, in our genius and in our pain, in our places where we've fallen short and where we excel, all of it is God. All of it has purpose and meaning, and all of it is taking us to someplace magnificent if we can just embrace it all.
It's all perfect all the time, even when it doesn't feel like it.
All the time.
It doesn't feel like it.
Oh, I know. Sometimes we don't. I know today for me has been a little bit of a challenge. My mom died 2 days ago, and so that's, that's given me a moment of a deep sense of loss and, wondering whether or not this show was going to be all that I hoped it would be. And what I know is I do feel raw, and it's okay. It doesn't change the fact that there's great joy and celebration in life. But I do feel raw, but I love that we've had this conversation because I think it's helped me to feel a little better on a day when I wasn't feeling so great. So I thank you, Patrick, because
you're so welcome. And I thank you for your vulnerability, because your rawness makes me love you even more. And I know that everyone who's watching now, or, later on, the streaming of it, or whatever you call it, feels that too for you.
Yeah. Well, it's the journey that we're on is really to acknowledge that each one of us is individual, each one of us is unique and special. And as we can fully embrace our uniqueness and share that with the world, we create a better place for all of us. So anyway, get your copy of Magic of the Soul by the Reverend Dr. Patrick Harbula. You will be glad you did. It is phenomenal. Check out his website as well.
Well, let me say this. I just want to say, anyone that's seeing this, if you contact me, I will offer you a complimentary coaching session, just because I had fun today.
All right. Well, make sure you take him up on that. I did the last time, and this is where it's got us. So I'll tell you, good stuff. Good stuff. Patrick, thank you so much. You are a gift. I am so grateful to you. Thank you, everyone, for watching. This is The Joy Show, where we acknowledge there's just one you, and you are absolutely precious. God bless everybody. See you next time.